So today we're going to discuss the four pillars of the second coming and how they relate to Joseph Smith Matthew. But before we go through systematically through the section, the chapter, we're going to get a few things out of the way. Now you'll notice here that we've got yellow up here. So this is the first pillar, and then red. So we're at the second pillar. So here's a transition. And just before the transition, we have the abomination of desolation. And again, shall the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet be fulfilled? And immediately after the tribulation of those days, what happens? The sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Now, that may sound rather familiar to you, but it's a little bit different than what we've discussed in the past. In the past, we discussed the sign that is the classic sign of the end of the sixth seal. Let's go there for a second. So here we are, Revelation 6, and the opening of the sixth seal. And lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell into the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And so in this sequence, the moon is red. But in the sequence that we get in Joseph Smith Matthew, the moon doesn't shine at all. So let's go back to Joseph Smith Matthew. Okay, so here, the moon shall not give her light. Rather than being red, it does not give her light. Well, what's the difference? Well, the moon being turned to blood is the end of the sixth seal. The moon not giving her light is actually when Christ comes. Okay, and then in verse 34 and 35, it talks, about the generation when these things happen. But with 36, it gets back to what we was talking about before. And after the tribulation of those days, what is that? The abomination of desolation. And the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And what is the other condition that is met at that time? The moon shall not give her light. Okay? So at that time, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. So you see, it's going to be dark when the sign of the Son of Man is given. Okay? And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So this is going to be pretty interesting, isn't it? When the sun is darkened, moon turned to blood, stars fall from heaven, we have an explanation for that in Revelation 6:12. It tells us that there's a great earthquake, and Joseph Smith said that that was the cause of the moon turning to blood. So that is, we would assume, atmospheric, okay? But this is not anything to do with the atmosphere, because if it were, you couldn't look up through that darkness and see the sign of man in heaven, or see Christ coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Could you? Okay, so get this picture in your mind. It's dark. You see the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And what else is going on here? Well, verse 37. And he shall send his angels before him with the great sound of a trump, and they shall gather together the remainder of his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So in the darkness, as the sign of the Son of Man is given, those saints who are the remainder, or those who have not trekked back to the place of the New Jerusalem and are ready there for the second coming are gathered to the where the saints are by angels. Okay, so let's discuss what this is talking about and kind of lay the foundation here. So we're going to back up to verse 27. Okay. And now I show unto you a parable. Behold, wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. So likewise shall mine elect be gathered from the four quarters of the earth. Okay. And then verse 37, which we were looking at a minute ago. And whoso treasureth my word shall not be deceived, for the Son of Man shall come, and he shall send his angels before him with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together the remainder of his elect from the four quarters of the earth, from one end of heaven to the other. Now let's go to verses 44 and 45. Then shall be fulfilled that which is written, in the last days, two shall be in the field, one shall be taken and the other left. Two shall be grinding at the mill, one shall be taken and the other left. So those who are not at the place of the New Jerusalem but are scattered through the world will be gathered by angels. Okay, so now let's go to JST Luke 17 and we'll get a fuller explanation of that. Okay, this is again Christ talking to his disciples on the Mount of Olives and answering questions about the second coming. Okay, and they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord, shall they be taken? And he said unto them, Whithersoever the body is gathered, or in other words, whithersoever the saints are gathered, thither will the eagles be gathered together, or thither will the remainder be gathered together. This he spake, signifying the gathering of his saints, and of angels descending and gathering the remainder unto them, the one from the bed, the other from the grinding, the other from the field, whithersoever he listeth. So there we have it. The angels will gather the remainder that are scattered throughout the earth that cannot participate in the trek, and it'll be right at this instant when there's darkness, and so they'll get there just barely in time for the Lord's coming as the bridegroom. And so you see, there will be no New Jerusalem built before this happens, because the New Jerusalem is to be built by the gathering of the saints. And the gathering of the saints won't be complete until these angels gather the remainder together and Christ comes to them. And then there's something that happens in connection with this. Verse 39. For verily there shall be new heavens and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness. And in a minute we'll discuss what that's all about. So before moving forward, we're just going to bop over here to Mark chapter 13, and it basically tells us the same thing that we were reading in Joseph Smith Matthew. Verse 24, it says, But in those days, after the tribulation, so that would be the abomination of desolation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four quarters, or from the four winds, from the uttermost parts of the earth unto the uttermost parts of heaven. So we see a confirmation of what we were talking about before. Okay, it will be dark. They'll see the sun, Christ coming, and he will send his angels before him to gather the elect. Now we're going to spend a minute here in the 133rd section of the Doctrine and Covenants, just confirming some of the things that we were reading in Joseph Smith Matthew. This also is about Christ coming as the bridegroom, and it says, "Who is this that cometh down from God in heaven with dyed garments, yea, from the regions which are not known, clothed in glorious apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength?" Well, of course, this is the Lord appearing here at this time, isn't it? It's interesting in verse 48 that he is dressed in red apparel. But here's the connection that we really want to make is here in verse 49, where the sun shall hide its face in shame, the moon shall withhold its light, and the stars shall be hurled from their places. And so the same set of circumstances that we were looking at before. There's darkness, but we gain some other insights in verse 50. And his voice shall be heard. I have trodden the winepress alone, and have brought judgment upon all people, and none were with me. And I have trampled them in my fury, and did tread upon them in mine anger. And their blood have I sprinkled upon my garments, and stained all my raiment. For this was the day of vengeance, which was in my heart. And so apparently the world is going to know that Christ is here, and he is going to speak to the inhabitants of the world at this time. Moving down a couple of verses, we find out who shall be in the presence of the Lamb when he comes. He says, "Yea, Enoch also, and they who were with him, the prophets who were before him, and Noah also, and they who were before him." Okay, and we can go on through and see all of these others who will be with Christ when he comes, but Enoch and they who were with him. So Enoch, of course, when we speak of Enoch, we speak of the city of Enoch. Okay, and so obviously Enoch and the city of Enoch are going to come with Christ when he comes at this time. And then in verse 56 we learn that there's a resurrection, and we learn what appearance we're talking about here. "And the graves of the saints shall be opened, and they shall come forth and stand on the right hand of the Lamb, when he shall stand upon Mount Zion and upon the holy city New Jerusalem, and they shall sing the song of the Lamb day and night forever and ever." And so there will be a resurrection at this time. In his first appearance, or here at the first pillar, all the righteous saints who have died since Christ's own resurrection, and then of course he comes. And the New Jerusalem spoken of here is not a New Jerusalem, or the New Jerusalem that the saints will build. This is a different New Jerusalem altogether. And so we're going to go to Revelation 21, and we'll gain a little bit more insight about that. Okay, so remember when we were discussing Luke 17 and this information about Christ sending angels before him to gather the saints to where the body of the saints would be. And then we mentioned this verse 49, which is connected with the saints being gathered from the four quarters of the earth. "For verily there shall be a new heaven and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness." So let's go to Revelation 21 and find out what this is about. Okay, so here we are, and we'll notice in verse 1, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea." And what else happens? And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, come down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. This is the same thing that we were reading about in D&C 133, where we were told that Enoch and his people would be in the presence of the Lamb when he came. Okay, and we learned in verse 3, he says, behold, the tabernacle of God is with man. The tabernacle of God, that is the city of Enoch, or here addressed as the New Jerusalem. And he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself shall be with them and be their God. Okay. He'll wipe away their tears, and there'll be no more sorrow or pain. All former things will pass away. And he shall sit upon the throne. Behold, I make all things new. He said unto me, write, for the words are true, for these words are true and faithful. So here we are. He comes and as to the New Jerusalem, the city of Enoch comes with him. It descends out of heaven, and it again is addressed here as the New Jerusalem, and it is also a bride adorned for her husband. Okay, so that was a rather long introduction or diversion, but in order to understand Joseph Smith Matthew, it's just important that we understand how the darkness plays in, how the gathering of the saints to the New Jerusalem, and then those who are scattered to the four corners of the earth, how they are brought in just prior to Christ's coming. And we needed to understand that the New Jerusalem would descend from heaven with him at that time when he comes to the saints. And so now we're just going to kind of go through the rest of the chapter and catch some of the other odds and ends. But we're going to start with this image because we're going to be in the sixth seal or first pillar to begin with, and then the second pillar here, Christ coming to his saints at the New Jerusalem as the bridegroom. Joseph Smith Matthew is exclusively about this appearance. Okay, and if you understand that, it'll give you great insight and understanding and wisdom when you're reading through Joseph Smith Matthew. So let's go back and start and just kind of go through the chapter. So as we said, Joseph Smith Matthew is about the saints, about Christ coming as the bridegroom, which of course the members of the church, or at least those who are of the 5 virgins who have oil in their lamps, will be a part of that meeting, or they'll be invited into the wedding. Now you'll notice here we see in a lot of places through this chapter the elect are mentioned. Joseph Smith Matthew is written for the sake of the elect according to the covenant, or members of the church. We see it again down here, the elect mentioned. I speak these things unto you for the elect's sake. And here in verse 27, the elect are mentioned. And again, 29, for mine elect's sake. That's what Joseph Smith Matthew was given for the elect's sake. Okay, and so, there's in the pillar number 1 portion of this, there's mention of false prophets and so forth. He mentions here that the second coming will be as the light of the morning coming from out of the east, that shineth unto the west, and covereth the whole earth. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And Joseph Smith told us this as well. As the Earth rotates over a 24-hour period, all people on the Earth will come to know that something's going on. And of course, as we discussed, the fact that it's in darkness is going to make it that much more dramatic when it happens. And then, of course, verse 31, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world. Of course, that's the day of the Gentiles. That's where we are now, until we come down to the destruction, which is really the destruction of the Gentiles, or the end of the day of the Gentiles, when all of this happens. And then, of course, sun being darkened, moon not giving her light, stars falling from heaven. Now it tells us here, it says in verse 34, verily I send to you this generation in which these things shall be shown forth shall not pass away until all I have told you shall be fulfilled. Although the days will come that heaven and the earth shall pass away, yet my word shall not pass away, but shall all be fulfilled. Okay, so in other words, this is the opening of the seventh seal when Christ comes to the New Jerusalem and to the saints, or when he comes as the bridegroom. And if we were to go to Revelation 8:1, it would read, and when he had opened the seventh seal, there was a half hour of silence. And so it's the opening of the seventh seal. It's the beginning of the half hour silence. And so let's see. Let's go to our graphic of the pillars. So when Christ comes at this time and the seventh seal opens, the half hour of silence starts. So with here, it starts, continues until Christ comes in his glory. And we mentioned this in the previous video. So that's what that generation is going to be. They're going to be around for these events. It's basically 21 years, and so, why would they not be around for those events? Again, we have the tribulation of those days, or in other words, the abomination of desolation, darkness, Christ coming, sends his angels before him, okay? And then this section right here that's in yellow, yeah, I think that's the appropriate color. It speaks of the parable of the fig tree. And, there's two ways we can look at this. We can look at all the signs that we're seeing, for years in the past and coming down as indications that we're getting closer. But I really tend to view this as a sign that he's speaking of in the year that he comes. So, because these signs will be manifest in the spring of the year, the saints will be liberated from bondage according to D&C 103, and then they will have the summer months to trek back to the New Jerusalem for this appearance. And so we'll see these great destructions and such happen, and all these signs being given in the spring of the year. And by these, the summer is nigh at hand. All of those events leading up to the second coming. And then, of course, if you've read the first 7 chapters of the a year of Bridegroom Cometh, you know that I believe that Christ will come in the fall, and I've got lots of documentation for that. But, okay, so and so he says, when you see all of these things happening, you will know that he is even at the doors. So that's not years away. When he's even at the doors, that's months away. We'll know in that year. The saints will know that he's coming. It says, but of the day and the hour no one knoweth, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Okay, so whenever you tell someone about the second coming, and particularly members of the church, you'll get this thrown up that no one knows and no one's going to know when these things happen, but they just have not got the memo yet, and maybe some of you haven't got the memo yet. So let's go find the memo that modifies that statement. Okay, so here we find the modifying memo to Christ's statement that no man would know the hour or the day. This is given by the prophet Joseph Smith in a general conference of the church in 1843, April of that year. And so it's pretty much an unimpeachable statement here. He says, Christ says, no man knoweth the day or the hour when the Son of Man cometh. This is a sweeping argument for sectarianism against Latter-day-ism. Did Christ speak this as a general principle throughout all generations? Oh no, he spake it in the present tense. No man that was then living upon the footstool of God knew the day or the hour. But he did not say there was no man throughout all generations that should not know the day or the hour. Okay, so apparently it was true when it was stated. It was the same statement that no man knew was, we can find that in the Doctrine and Covenants too, as well. And so no man in that generation knew the day or the hour. But we live in the generation of the second coming, and we're going to have to know what's going on. And so you can find this if you download the free PDF of The Bridegroom Cometh. It's on page 16, and you can reference that there. Okay, in this next area, he compares this appearance or his coming here as to Noah, and the world in general will have no clue. They're going to be caught totally unawares. And then, well, let's see. Before going on, I want to make a little statement here about, again, it's kind of backing up here, but talking about Christ coming in darkness. In the parable of the 10 virgins, if you go read that, that's Matthew 25. You'll notice that the bride comes at midnight, or he comes in darkness, and that's not just just a nice story. That also is predictive of the way it's really going to happen, because Christ will come when the earth is in darkness. So I neglected to mention that earlier, so I wanted to throw that in there. Okay. Let's see. Are just speaking about being watchful and aware, and knowing what's going on. Those servants of the Lord had better be doing what they're supposed to be doing, and not persecuting or smiting their fellow servants when the Lord comes. And then verse 55, you don't find this in Matthew, but here in Joseph Smith Matthew, it has been appended to the end of this chapter. And he says, and thus cometh the end of the wicked according to the prophecy of Moses. What is the prophecy of Moses? Well, you get that prophecy of Moses in the Book of Mormon, 3rd Nephi 21:11, okay, which is, he's saying in that case that the Gentiles, the wicked Gentiles, are to be cut off, and this is really what what the abomination of desolation in the second coming is about. It's the cutting off of the Gentiles, and because Christ comes here to America. And so he says, they shall be cut off from among my people. It says, but the end is not yet, but by and by. Well, why is the end not yet? To answer that question, let's just go back to our graphic of the four pillars. Okay, as I mentioned, everything in Joseph Smith Matthew, well, is one of these two pillars right here. Okay, but this second pillar is the primary focus of Joseph Smith Matthew. And the end is not yet, because Christ still has to come to the Jews, and Christ still has to come to in his glory, and he has to fulfill all the remaining covenants that he has made to fallen man before he will come. What we talk about coming in his glory, that would be D&C 88, starting with verse 95 and reading to the end of that chapter, and also D&C 77:12, and he will fulfill all of his covenants and to fallen man. And D&C 88, he tells us that the saints are quickened. In other words, they're transformed from telestial to terrestrial, because the earth is about to undergo a great change, which it will do at the end of the half hour of silence. And then everything that is not able to abide a terrestrial existence will be done away with. The saints will be caught up. The earth will be transformed, and then the saints will be laid or rest back down upon the earth, and the millennium will continue. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Please leave comments or questions. Thank you.